Okay, year 8. This is one for you, a video for you. You've all been bugging me for one over the last week and a half, so here is one for you. This is a video that I am calling the Tudor Religious Roller Coaster. Why am I calling it the Tudor Religious Roller Coaster? Well, first of all, I'm going to be looking at religion during the reign of 4 Tudor monarchs: Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. So that hence the Tudor religious part. Why roller coaster? Well, there's a very good reason for that. Religion during the time of the Tudors, particularly after Henry VIII, or during the reign of Henry VIII onwards, religion goes left, right, up, down, all over the place like a roller coaster, because all of the different monarchs have different ideas about what they want the church to be like in England. So religion changes here, there and everywhere all the way through, as I say, the reigns of these 4 Tudor monarchs. So it's a bit like a roller coaster. So I'm going to talk to you about those 4 monarchs and the changes that they make to the church in England. Starting with Henry VIII. Now this should all be familiar to you. We've done this year, but hopefully it will help you when you come to revise for your exam, which is in 1 week. So Henry VIII. When Henry VIII became king, he was a Catholic. Important to remember this. When he becomes king, he is a Catholic. Okay? Just like all the other kings in England have been before him. His father was a Catholic. All the other kings in England have been Catholics. So is his wife. His wife is a Catholic as well. His wife, Catherine of Aragon, is a Catholic. They've been married, or they were married, I should say, for 24 years. They were married for 24 years. And in that time, Catherine had given birth to several children, but most of them, well, nearly all of them, had died when they were very young. Only one of them had survived until adulthood, which was Mary, their daughter Mary, who I'll come back to in a minute. Now Henry wanted a son. He wanted a son to carry on his dynasty, his legacy, and obviously Mary being a girl, she wasn't a son, and Catherine had got too old. She couldn't have any more children, and so after 24 years Henry decided to do a very nice thing and divorce her just because she hadn't had a boy. Bit harsh, but there you go. That's Henry VIII for you. It's not even the worst thing he did. So Henry wanted to divorce Catherine, but he couldn't divorce Catherine for 2 reasons really. One, the Catholic Church doesn't really approve of divorce. But the bigger reason, the more important reason, the one that you need to know, is Henry couldn't divorce Catherine because he had permission, special permission, from the Pope to marry Catherine in the first place. And that's because Catherine had been married to his brother, funnily enough. His brother Arthur had been married to Catherine because Arthur was older than Henry, and Arthur had was originally supposed to be king once Henry's father, also called Henry VII, died. But Arthur died before his dad. So before Arthur could become king, he died, very sadly. And Catherine of Aragon, being the daughter of the King of Spain, was someone who Henry's father wanted Henry VIII to marry. Because he thought it would be a very good idea to kind of link the 2 countries, England and Spain, 2 very powerful countries in Europe at this time, link them together through marriage. It would be good for both of them. It could be an alliance. They could be friendly with each other and help each other out in wars or trade or things like that. So Henry VIII ended up getting special permission from the Pope to marry Catherine. And as I say, they got married, were together for 24 years, and everything seemed fine until, obviously, Catherine didn't give birth to a boy. Well, she did give birth to some boys, but the boys didn't survive. So in order to get a divorce, Henry at first asked the Pope, and the Pope said, no, you can't have a divorce. I've given you special permission to marry Catherine, so no, I'm not going to give you a divorce. You can't change your mind when I've gone to all that trouble and all that effort, that special effort, to grant you marriage to Catherine. So no, you cannot have a divorce, Henry. So Henry decided the only way for him to get a divorce was to break with Rome. Okay, so to stop being Catholic, basically, and set up his own church, a Protestant church, the Church of England. And that's what he did. He broke with Rome, so he broke away from the Catholic Church. He set up his new church, Church of England, in England. And once he'd done that, he was then free to marry Anne Boleyn, who was a lady who he'd taken a fancy to. He ended up marrying her, and they lived together for a while before, funnily enough, Anne didn't give him a son, and Henry went one further and chopped her head off. Anne did give him a child, but it was another girl, Elizabeth, who again I'll come on to in a little while. Now, I'll just backtrack a little bit. There are other reasons why Henry broke with Rome. It wasn't just that he wanted a divorce. That was the main reason, but there are other reasons that we've talked about in class, and I'll go back through them now. The first one is that when Henry broke with Rome, he was able to close down all of the Catholic monasteries in England, and there were quite a few. And when he did that, he was then able to take away all the land that those monasteries owned, and again there was a lot of that, and all of their treasure and their money, and the monasteries had an awful lot of that. Monasteries were very, very rich places, and they had a lot of money and a lot of land. So when Henry took this, it made him an awful lot richer. So that was good news for him as well. Bad news for the monasteries, good news for Henry. Another reason why he broke with Rome was because the Pope was an incredibly powerful figure in the world at this point. Arguably the most powerful figure in the world, or in Europe anyway, being the head of the Catholic Church. He is seen as the voice of God. Okay, so there's God up in the heavens, and then there's the Pope, who is kind of God's representative on earth. So a really powerful figure. Anything the Pope says, people take Catholics take very, very seriously. So if the Pope said something that Henry didn't agree with, that was bad news for Henry, because people are more likely, or were more likely, to listen to the Pope over their king. So when Henry breaks with Rome and makes England a Protestant country, or makes it a Church of England country anyway, that means people shouldn't listen to the Pope anymore. They should listen to Henry. Henry makes himself head of that church, head of the Church of England. He's in charge of that church. So again, it takes away some of the power from the Pope, and it gives it to him. So another bonus for Henry when he breaks with Rome and sets up his own church. Now, as far as other changes to the church go, yes, he has broken with Rome. Yes, he has created his own church, the Church of England, and yes, he's made himself the head of the church, and he's closed down all the monasteries. They're big changes. But everything else stays pretty similar to how it was before. Church services are still performed in Latin, as Catholic services were. The Bible is still in Latin. Pretty much all the church services are carried out in exactly the same way as they were before. All the religious festivals still exist. All the churches are very colourful and decorated and fancy. So not an awful lot changes as far as that goes. Henry had been a very good Catholic up until the point that he breaks from Rome. The Pope had actually written a book about Henry, calling him the defender of the faith, which is a real compliment coming from the Pope. So not an awful lot changes. Yes, he creates his own church, and as I say, closes down the monasteries and makes himself head of the church. They're big changes, but everything else stays the same. Now, when Henry dies, his son, who he had with his third wife, Jane Seymour, after he got rid of Anne Boleyn, he eventually does have a son who survives with his third wife, Jane Seymour, called Edward VI, and he becomes King Edward VI of England. Now, Edward had been raised as a Protestant, okay, because obviously he'd been born after Henry had broken with Rome. So he'd been raised as a Protestant. When Henry died and Edward became king, Edward was only 10 years old, which meant that obviously he didn't really know what he was doing. He was a bit too young to rule England effectively, so he relied on a team of advisors, people who could give him advice and tell him what to do, how to run the country. And all of these people were Protestants. So Edward had been raised a Protestant, and all of his advisors were Protestant. So naturally the country went further, or became even more Protestant than it had been under Henry. As I say, under Henry, a lot of the Catholic practices and traditions had remained. Once Edward becomes king, that begins to change. Here's a big change, a dip on our roller coaster, if you will. Edward introduces a ton of changes, and I've written them down here because I'll probably end up forgetting some, so here they are to remind me. So he introduced so many things, I'm going to read them off the list because I will forget some. He introduced an English prayer book. Okay, that's what Protestants wanted. They didn't like reading the Bible in Latin because most of them didn't speak Latin, so they didn't really know what they were reading or what they were listening to when the priest read it out. Which leads me on to the second change, English church services. Rather than the priest reading out Latin, where some people in the crowd or in the seats are going, what's he saying? I don't really understand this. Now they can understand it because it's in English and they speak English. Priests could get married, which is quite a big change. Up until this point, they hadn't been allowed to get married or even have a girlfriend or a partner. Priests now dress in very plain clothing. And as well as the clothing, the church itself becomes very plain. Stained glass windows are got rid of. Wall paintings that have been up, stuck around the church, they're taken down. So churches become very plain. Indulgences. This should be ringing some bells here, right? Indulgences were banned. Remember indulgences that were basically those kind of get out of purgatory free cards, if you will. You could buy these indulgences, which might be maybe a saint's relic, so it might be, I don't know, a piece of the cross, or it might be the hair of a saint, or it might just be a bit of paper signed by the Pope saying here's some time off purgatory. They're banned, they're got rid of. Many of the Catholic church festivals are stopped as well. There have been lots and lots of festivals which had actually got people days off work or time off work. They got rid of, so a lot of people aren't very happy about that. And finally, communion, which is the bread and the wine in the church. Up until this point, or in the Catholic faith, the bread and the wine, when the priest basically blesses that bread and wine, Catholics believe that it has become the actual body and blood of Jesus. In the Protestant faith, something that again Edward introduces to the English Church of England, it now just becomes a symbol. So this bread symbolises the body of Jesus, and this wine symbolises the blood of Jesus. Okay, so it's not the actual body and blood of Jesus, is now a symbol. So that's another big change that he makes to the church. So you can see Henry kind of starts off this change, but a lot of things stay the same. When Edward comes in, big changes. Okay, the church is changed quite dramatically. So who's pleased about this? Well, for a start, English Protestants, but there aren't that many of them. Most people in England are still Catholic, or still certainly think in a Catholic way. Remember that the Church of England only exists for about 13 years before Henry dies. It's only been around for 13 years, so it's still quite new. So a lot of people still kind of think back to how it was before Henry created the Church of England, before Edward came in and made even more changes. So lots of people aren't very happy about this. I mentioned before the church festivals. They're not very happy about those being stopped. They're not happy, I should say, about many things that Edward's introduced, because they like the Catholic traditions and the Catholic way of doing things. So many people actually end up ignoring Edward's changes. Yeah, they don't really follow his rules, and a lot of churches actually just carry on in the traditional Catholic manner. Now the good news for them is that no one gets killed for this, and in fact only one Catholic bishop ends up getting locked up for not changing his ways. But other than that, there's no violence, there's no mass arrests. Edward kind of just lets people get on with this. He introduces these changes, but he doesn't pursue people who are breaking his rules, which again is good news for those people who want to carry on being Catholic. However, things then change with the next monarch, the next Tudor monarch, Mary the First. Now Mary the First, year 8, you may remember, she has a nickname. In fact, I'm going to give you 2 seconds to shout it at the screen. That's right, Bloody Mary. Okay, why is she called, or why does she have the nickname Bloody Mary? Again, you're probably shouting that at the screen now. But she has the nickname Bloody Mary because, unlike her brother, or half-brother, Edward, she does persecute people who ignore her religious rules, and I'll go into that in just a second, but I'll rewind a minute just to tell you a bit more about Mary and her background. So Mary's mother was Catherine of Aragon. I've mentioned that already. Mary's mother was Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and she was raised as a Catholic. Okay, her mother was a Catholic, and her father started off as a Catholic, and even after he'd left the Catholic Church, he carried on with a lot of Catholic traditions. She'd been raised as a Catholic. She was a very strict Catholic. So when she became queen in 1553, she basically changed everything back again. Well, that was her aim. Change everything back again. So the Pope is restored as the head of the church. Remember, Henry had made himself head of the church, and Edward had carried that on. He'd been the head of the church in England. Mary switches that back. She says, no, the Pope is now the head of the church in England again. Okay, as it was before Henry changed things. Services go back to being in Latin, and churches are decorated again. Okay, so the stained glass windows are re-put in, and the wall paintings are put back on the wall. Basically, England becomes Catholic again, in a nutshell. It becomes Catholic again. But not only that, not only does it become Catholic again, but those people who are Protestants and do like the Protestant way of doing things and consider themselves Protestants, they are persecuted by Mary. How she earns her nickname, Bloody Mary. During her reign, around 300 Protestants were burnt at the stake or burned to death. Okay, so again, another big change on our Tudor religious roller coaster. We've gone from Henry being Catholic to, he's left the Catholic Church, and now we've got the Church of England, and now Edward's introducing even more changes to make it even more Protestant. But now Mary's gone back to being a Catholic again, and England's Catholic, and nobody really knows what's going on. It's crazy. And then Mary dies in 1558. She's only queen for 5 years, and she's replaced by her half-sister, Henry's other daughter, Elizabeth I, and she is the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife. Now, Elizabeth had been raised as a Protestant. You might be following all this. She'd been raised as a Protestant and considered herself a Protestant, but Elizabeth actually wanted to introduce some peace and some order. She recognised just how chaotic things had been. That her father had been Catholic and then left the church and set up his own, and Edward had carried that on, but then Mary had taken it back to being a Catholic. Elizabeth just thinks, enough, let's just have some peace and order and hopefully some unity in England. I'm going to now come up with my middle way. Again, I hope this is ringing bells for you. It should be, and if not, time to revise. Okay, this Elizabeth brings in what's known as her middle way. Okay, so she introduces an English prayer book. So once again, the books that people read or hear from anyway in church are now in English again. So Protestants are happy about that. But at the same time, many of the Catholic traditions are kept. Okay, so you can see a middle way, a little bit of things to keep the Protestants happy, and a little, or the Church of England supporters happy, the Protestants, and some stuff to keep the Catholics happy. Yeah, a middle way, keeping both sides happy. However, Elizabeth does get quite annoyed by people who don't follow her middle way. Okay, because she thinks, come on, I'm trying to keep both of you happy here. I can't be completely Catholic because the Protestants will get annoyed. I can't be completely Protestant because the Catholics will get annoyed. So, I'm sorry guys, you've got to kind of accept my middle way, and if you don't, I'm going to get quite cross about it. Now, one group in particular who cause a bit of bother, for want of a better phrase, and try and argue against Elizabeth's middle way, are the Puritans. Once again, a term that you should all be familiar with. We've done plenty about the Puritans in lessons this year. Puritans are, I think I've used this phrase in lesson quite a few times, like super Protestants. Okay, they want everything in church to be incredibly plain. The clue's in the name really, Puritans. They want to live a very pure life, plain, simple, pure life. Okay, everything or most things should be focused around God. Okay. Which is why they don't like things like sport, they don't like music in church, they don't like things that they think are going to distract people from God. Life should really centre around God and worship and prayer. Okay, so they don't like things that kind of distract people from God and from prayer and from religion. So So they're not happy about Elizabeth's middle way, because obviously she's reintroduced, or kept I should say, many of the Catholic traditions, and they really don't like that, because Catholics like a lot of decoration and a lot of fancy things in churches, like stained glass windows and wall paintings. Puritans really don't like that. So whenever a Puritan spoke out about Elizabeth's middle way and said, we don't like the way you're controlling the church, or the changes you've introduced to the church, Elizabeth, she responded very harshly. An example, I read this out in the lesson way back in September, October, when we did Elizabeth. You'll remember John Stubbs. He was a Puritan. He spoke out against the church about Elizabeth's changes, I should say, or Elizabeth's middle way. He had his right hand cut off with a cleaver. Okay, so he lost a hand for basically telling Elizabeth that he didn't like the stuff that she'd done to the church, her middle way. So Elizabeth also had a tendency to react quite strongly to people speaking out about her ways, just like Mary did. Okay. Another group who aren't fully happy with Elizabeth's middle way are the Catholics, because she has reintroduced an English prayer book, and the church isn't completely Catholic, and a lot of Catholics think, well, no, I want church to be completely Catholic. I'm not happy with this middle way. It's not what I want. Many Catholics who don't go to church because, as I say, they don't like this middle way, they'd rather not go to church than go to this kind of watered down Catholic church, if you will, have to pay a fine. Okay, they have to pay a fine for not going to church. And it's difficult for them to worship. There aren't any Catholic churches. Okay, the only churches that are open are the Church of England churches, which, as I say, have some Catholic traditions in them, but they're not fully Catholic, and a lot of Catholics aren't happy about that. So at first they have to pay a fine if they don't go to church, but Elizabeth then makes things a little bit more difficult for them. There is a plot to put a Catholic monarch on the throne, which again we've looked at in lessons, and I may do a video about that in the future. And when there's a plot to put a Catholic monarch on the throne, Elizabeth gets very worried about Catholics and thinks, I need to be a bit harsher with them, because a fine's not enough. I need to be really harsh with them to kind of stop them rebelling, if you will. So from about 1580 onwards, things get very difficult for Catholics, for Catholic priests in particular. Catholic priests are told to leave the country, and if they don't, they are persecuted, and many people end up hiding priests in priest holes. We looked at pictures of those in lesson. Priest holes to try to hide Catholic priests from Elizabeth's soldiers who may come and get them. And any Catholic priest who is caught will also suffer punishment at the hands of Elizabeth. For instance, we looked at that Catholic priest who ended up having iron spikes driven under his fingernails and toenails, again because he refused to follow Elizabeth's middle way and wanted to be fully Catholic. So you can see here, just from that 20-minute video, you can see how much religion under the 4 Tudor monarchs that we've looked at this year changes. Yeah? So if I were you, if you're still a bit confused about who does what, who's a Catholic, who's a Protestant, who introduces what kind of prayer book, and who makes churches plain or decorated or burns Protestants or what have you, if you're confused, I would rewind this right now and re-watch it, and if you want to take some notes, I would, because obviously this could come up in your exam, which, as I say, is in a week and a half's time. But I hope this has been helpful for you, Year 8, in terms of your revision. Keep up with the revision, and I will see you soon with another video. Thank you very much.